Welcome back. It's not good enough. That is the words there of the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, who has apologised to rape victims and admitted that they are being failed and that thousands of them have gone without justice. Rape convictions have fallen to a record low in recent years, with fewer now than 1.6% of reported rapes resulting in convictions. That's shocking, isn't it? Ministers have promised to do everything possible to reverse what they call the worrying trends. Robert Buckland says the following: too many victims of rape and sexual violence have been denied the justice they deserve as a result of systemic failings. We are deeply sorry for this, and we will not rest until real improvements are made. Now, joining me is Catherine Araniella, who felt suicidal after her case was dropped by the Crown Prosecution Service. Also joining me is Maggie Oliver, the detective turned whistleblower who resigned from Greater Manchester Police in late 2012 in order to expose the now infamous Rochdale grooming scandal. Ladies, welcome. Catherine, let me start with you, if I may. You've just heard there the Justice Secretary saying sorry that people have been failed. If you will, just tell me briefly a little bit about your story and then follow on by saying what it makes you feel when you hear the apology from the government.
So my story was I was attacked and the police picked up the case and I have to say that the police were amazing throughout the investigation. It was very much focused on the suspect rather than me, which is how it should be. We got to the point where there was a trial date set. All the way along, told by the police that this was a really strong case. It was never mentioned that this case could be dropped. In fact, they were more worried about me dropping out of the process than the case itself. And practically on the eve of the trial, I was told that my case was due to be dropped, and that was the CPS decision. I know the police had challenged this decision. They really wanted the case to go forward. And the CPS were quite happy to just send me a letter with their outcome rather than meet me. But again, the police really came up trumps and insisted on an in-person meeting with the CPS. And it was at that meeting where the CPS just treated me. There was no dignity, no respect, no empathy. It was the most appalling meeting I've ever had. And it was that meeting after that I came away and it was re-traumatizing and I didn't want to be here anymore. And yet the attack itself hadn't left me feeling suicidal. It was the meeting and the treatment at the CPS that really had that impact on me. They're dealing with highly traumatized individuals and they make no allowances for that. How do I feel following Robert Buckland's apology? First of all, it's an acknowledgement. That is a positive, but the apology does not fit what's actually happened. They have known about this for years. We activists and campaigners have been talking about this and raising these issues for years. In the 2 years that they have conducted their rape review, nothing has changed. And in fact, if I went to a police station today and reported a rape, I really don't think that the process would be any different. So the apology, I'm afraid, is not good enough. Robert Buckland said we must do better. I challenge that and say, no, you must do your best.
Do your best. Maggie, let me bring you in now. What do you think to the report today?
Like Catherine, I welcome the apology and the expressed desire to improve the process. But unfortunately, I don't have a great deal of hope that we will see the changes which we need, which are monumental changes. The report actually was written without consulting victims or survivors, first of all. It offers very few actionable recommendations, and it doesn't give details where the funding is going to come from. We need a complete overhaul of the whole criminal justice system, not just tinkering here and there. Whilst I'm reassured and I'm from Catherine's point of view, I think the fact that she received a good service from the police is something. But I would say from our experience in the Maggie Oliver Foundation that is not typical, because we are inundated with victims and survivors who say that whilst the rape or the abuse is horrendous, the system which chews them up and spits them out and lacks care for them, where they're starved of communication, where there are long delays between anything happening, that they really are the bottom of the pile. The system focuses predominantly on the rights of the offenders, and victims and survivors have lost trust in the system. And this report gives an indication of why. If 99 rapists or people who abuse know that they are not going to face any consequences, and that is it's a blueprint for rape. And we are living in a country where rape has really been decriminalised. And I would argue that if you commit a burglary or you steal a radio from a car, you stand a far greater chance of being prosecuted than you do if you report a rape. And these are, Catherine reported a rape where the police clearly felt that they had evidence to prosecute. And if a case like that even doesn't cross the threshold, then what kind of a society are we living in? And, if I was raped and it was, unless it was a real textbook stranger rape where you were dragged down an alleyway, you really have to consider whether you would come out at the end of the system feeling worse than when you went in. At the foundation, we help survivors every single day. We've already spoken to Kriti Patel a few months ago, and I would reach out to her and say, speak to organisations like the foundation, where we are survivor and victim led. We need to be listening to survivors like Catherine to learn how to rectify this completely broken system. And I just want to make one more point, that I would say that I think honesty and transparency and keeping the victims and the survivors in the conversation is as important as a prosecution. If at the beginning of the process there is not evidence to prosecute, then have that conversation with the victim and don't put them through 2 years of hell where at the end of the process they are dropped for whatever reason. Be honest and have the conversation.
Catherine, can I just ask you though, Maggie talks about people that have just lost trust now in the system. Have you lost trust in the system?
I'm often asked if a friend came forward and disclosed to me that she had been raped and asked me if she should report. I'm torn, because the part of me wants to try and achieve some kind of justice. We want to get these dangerous people off the streets. And I think that's when people do come forward, that is often a real driving force of, gosh, I don't want this to happen to somebody else. So there is that side of me that I can understand. If this friend disclosed to me, I would completely support that she, should report. However, going through that process, as Maggie has just described as well, it's just horrific and re-traumatizing. My advice is often kind of focus on your recovery. Are you strong enough to go through what is going to be asked of you? And what is going to be asked of you is going to be so much. I had to give up my entire medical records, which I really struggled with. Why? Why does the CPS need to see my entire medical records? What are you looking for? Because that's number one. It's a complete violation.
You raise an interesting point here, because one of the recommendations in the report today is actually to make the focus of the investigation more perpetrator-centric, which blows my mind, because I just would have assumed it was perpetrator-centric anyway, but alas, it seems not. You mentioned that in your particular experience, Catherine, that it was more perpetrator-centric, but what do you think when you hear that it's taken 2 years of analysis and reporting to conclude that?
I think it's ridiculous. And in those 2 years, how many other work perpetrators have been released with no charge and left to reoffend? Rape is a crime where statistically the perpetrators are typically serial offenders. And actually through this process, as Maggie said, the blueprint, it gives them the carte blanche to go and reoffend, because they know they've got a 99% chance of getting away with it. And that's part of the problem too. So it's extremely frustrating to hear, oh, we're going to make the investigations suspect, the focus will be on the suspect. Well, actually in my case, they were all doing that, and that still wasn't enough to get past the CPS.
And Maggie, my final word to you, if I may. You mentioned that you think that basically we need a complete overhaul, a complete change. So very short answer, because I'm almost out of time. Do you think that will actually happen?
I think we need to look at the way we prosecute very differently. And I would leave the investigation and the prosecution to the police and the CPS, and I would bring in an army of people like us in the charity and ISLAs who will support the victims throughout the whole process and prepare them for the case when a case is dropped, that there is somebody there to hold their hand and help them recover and move on with their lives.
Okay, well, Catherine and Maggie, thank you very much for joining us. And Maggie, I am aware, of course, you mentioned it then, you have now set up a foundation that helps people that have been affected by sexual abuse. It's a topic I'm fascinated by, and I'm sure I'll have you on again to talk about that in the future. But for now, thank you very much. Now, after the break, we are going to be discussing calls for change in the law on assisted